Okay, so we're about to dive into this incredible, almost microscopic world where dentistry meets high-precision engineering. It's a place where a person's bite is treated like the source code for a super complex biological machine. This is the story of Gnathology, a truly radical attempt to perfectly rebuild a smile that was completely lost.
I mean, really think about that for a second. If all your teeth were gone, the entire instruction manual for how your jaw closes, how it chews, how it functions, it's just erased. The map is gone. So where do you even start? This was the huge problem that a really bold group of dentists decided they were going to solve. All right, let's get into it.
So our story kicks off back in the 1920s. Dentistry was making these huge leaps forward. But with all this new technology came a brand new, really high-stakes problem that the old ways just couldn't handle. Two American dentists, McCollum and Stollard, they looked at these huge reconstructive challenges and thought there has to be a better way. They came up with this whole new philosophy, a truly mechanical, scientific approach for tackling what seemed like an impossible job.
And this right here, this was the core of their whole philosophy. They basically said, look, trying to build a bite based on some mathematical average or some external theory is just fundamentally wrong. To them, it seemed really weird that the blueprint for a part of your own body would exist outside of your body. The real design, they insisted, had to be found inside the patient's own unique skeleton.
So you see, this was a massive shift in thinking. McCollum and Stollard's idea was that the true design isn't an average at all. It's totally unique to each person, and it's physically encoded right there in their jaw joint. They were going to read the blueprint directly from the source. And of course, they had to give this new quest a name. Gnathology. It literally means the study of the jaw. But for them, this wasn't just some new technique. They saw it as the start of a whole new science, one that was dedicated to cracking the code of jaw movement. And this slide just lays out the issue perfectly. You see, old school dentures, they just kind of sat on the gums, right? On the soft, forgiving cushion. There was some wiggle room. But the new crowns and bridges? Totally different story. They were rigidly fixed, basically bolted directly to the jawbone. So any tiny little mistake in the bite wasn't cushioned anymore. No, it was like a shockwave sent straight to the jaw joint. To solve this, the pioneers of Gnathology knew that guesswork just wasn't going to cut it. They needed a fixed and unchangeable reference point inside the human body, a true north that they could use to navigate and rebuild the entire system with absolute mechanical certainty.
And they found their true north in this concept called the hinge axis. Just picture a simple door hinge. No matter how you swing that door, it only ever moves around that one fixed point. Well, they believed the jaw had a similar axis, and that every single complex motion it makes was just a combination of pure rotation around this axis and the axis itself moving through space.
And along with that came another key idea, centric relation. Think of this as the jaw's factory default setting. It's that position of perfect rest and stability, defined purely by your bones, totally independent of where your teeth happen to be. This was like the ultimate reset button, a reliable starting point you could always go back to, even one that original blueprint was totally done. So the theory? It was beautiful, really elegant. But how do you capture this completely invisible data from a living, breathing person? Well, this is where the story gets really wild and starts to feel like something out of early science fiction, with this whole series of incredible devices designed to make the invisible visible. Let's start with step one. To find their true north, they invented this thing, the hinge axis locator. Yeah, it looks like a pretty complex headset, and its entire job was to hunt for a single, unmoving point on the patient's skin, the spot on the outside that corresponded to that internal hinge. And the genius of this thing is its simplicity. Check this out. As the patient made a tiny opening and closing motion, a little needle near their ear would move. If the needle was off axis, it drew a tiny little arc. But when they adjusted it to the perfect spot, the needle stopped arcing and just spun in place. That's it. They'd found the center. And this just shows how certain they were about this point. It was so fundamental, so absolutely crucial, that to make sure it was never lost between appointments, they would actually numb the patient's skin and permanently mark the spot with a tattoo, a tiny, precise dot on each side of the face. Incredible. Okay, so with those axis points tattooed on, step 2 was all about mapping them. For that, they used the hinge bow, which was basically a surveyor's tool for the human face. It locked onto those tattooed points and created a super precise 3D map, recording exactly where the upper jaw was in relation to that all-important hinge axis.
And that brings us to the main event, the pantograph. This wild-looking contraption was attached to the patient, and it was designed to act like a seismograph for the jaw. Its one and only job was to trace every tiny nuance of the jaw's movement onto these little recording plates.
So as the patient moved their jaw forward, left, right, every which way they could, a series of little needles would scratch these intricate lines. And these weren't just random squiggles. They were the patient's unique biomechanical signature, a literal fingerprint of their jaw's motion, captured right there on paper. So, here's the crucial question. What happens next? You've got tattooed reference points, you've got 3D maps, you've got a whole folder full of these weird line drawings. How on earth does that become a new set of teeth?
Well, this is where the magic really happens. Those lines, they became an instruction manual for a machine. By measuring the angles of those tracings, clinicians could physically set the dials and controls on this thing, the fully adjustable articulator. It was basically a form of analog programming, using physical data to configure a mechanical device.
And this right here, this was the massive breakthrough. They had created a mechanical twin, a perfect metal replica of the patient's entire jaw system that could just sit on a lab bench. For the very first time, technicians could design and test new teeth for perfect harmony without the patient even being in the room. This saved just countless hours of painstaking adjustments. But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? This beautiful, precise, clockwork theory had a fundamental challenge. As precise as it was, there was always going to be a gap between that mechanical perfection and the complex, kind of messy reality of human biology.
Here was the core problem, right here. See, Gnathology's whole mechanical model was built on the idea that the end of the jawbone, the condyle, was a perfect sphere, super simple and predictable to work with mechanically. The problem? Biological reality isn't that simple. A real human jaw joint is much more irregular, kind of like an egg shape. And that one seemingly small difference, well, it turned out to be a fatal flaw in the whole system.
And on top of that, this biological reality started to show the limits of their incredible machines. I mean, for all its amazing precision, the pantograph was ultimately measuring movement on the skin, not on the bone itself. It just couldn't see through the layers of muscle and tissue and everything else in between. And that meant an inherent margin of error was always going to be there. It was unavoidable.
And in fact, you can actually see the theory itself had to adapt over time. That core concept of centric relation, it really evolved over the decades. It started as this search for a single, rigid point in the bone, but it slowly softened into a more practical, functional position that was clinically useful, even if it wasn't some perfect theoretical absolute.
See, by physically working with these incredibly sophisticated articulators, by adjusting them, by feeling how they moved, dentists started to build this high-fidelity model of the jaw's mechanics right inside their own heads. The jaw wasn't some mysterious black box anymore. It was something they could actually visualize and simulate in 3 dimensions in their mind's eye. The machine literally installed a mental articulator that was maybe even more valuable than the physical one.
So in the end, Gnathology might not have been the perfect copy of reality it set out to be, but its legacy? Wow, it's arguably so much more profound. In its incredibly ambitious attempt to simulate a part of the human body, it didn't just rebuild the bite, it rewired the mind of the dentist. And that leaves us with this really fascinating question. Sometimes is the most valuable output of a simulator not the answer it gives you, but the deep understanding it builds in the person who uses it.
So this all leaves us with one last big question. The pioneers of Gnathology pushed analog technology to its absolute breaking point, trying to model the perfect jaw. So now, in our modern age of 3D scanning, of motion tracking, and AI, can we finally crack the code? Can we overcome those biological barriers that stop them in their tracks? Could our digital technology finally achieve that grand analog era dream? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?